Okay, we start with a quiz. Since it's Mother's Day, how many of you have seen the title or the book that's about to show up on the screen? How many are familiar with that book? Two people, and I'm counting all of you who are embarrassed to raise your hands in that group of people who have never seen this book. If you want to borrow it, it's one of my favorite books. I have a lot of favorite books, but this is one of the best. If you get a chance to read it, you need to. Let me share with you this is on the fly cover of the book. All I really need to know, I learned in kindergarten. Robert Fulghum, he was a Methodist pastor for a number of years. All I really need to know about how to live and what to do and how to be, I learned in kindergarten. Wisdom was not at the top of the graduate school mountain, but there in the sandpile of Sunday school. These are the things I learned. Share everything. Play fair. Don't hit people. Put things back where you found them. Clean up your mess. Don't take things that aren't yours. Say you're sorry when you hurt somebody. Wash your hands before you eat. Flush. Warm cookies and cold milk are good for you. Take a nap every afternoon. Be aware of wonder. Remember the little seed in the styrofoam cup? The roots go down and the plant goes up, and nobody really knows why or how, but we're all like that. Goldfish matter. Goldfish and hamsters and white mice, and even the little seed in the styrofoam cup, they all die. So do we. Think what a better world it would be if we all, the whole world, had cookies and milk about 3 o'clock every afternoon, and then lay down with our blankies for a nap. Or if all governments had a basic policy to always put things back where they found them and to clean up their own mess. And it is still true, no matter how old you are, when you go out into the world, it is best to hold hands and stick together. Now tell me that's not true. You can't get any better wisdom than that. The book is full of that kind of wisdom, by the way. And he wrote another book titled Uh-Oh. And they're both good books. They're both full of wisdom and understanding. Touching, poignant, ready to be used in our everyday life. And one of the things that points out is that what we learn as children is so applicable to the rest of life, even as we grow up. Our attitudes, our behaviors, much of what we understand is formed when those little ones are coming up. How we shape them is so important. So what happens in the home is important. I'm not here to make anybody feel guilty about what they have or haven't done. What I'm here to say is, as we build our families together, we need to remember that the home is important to all of life. There was a nun, a Catholic nun by the name of Sister Coretta, who was ministering in the 60s and 70s, and she was known all over the nation then. She did art. Common everyday stuff she would put into her art that communicated the gospel and grabbed people's attention. She drew things like loaves of bread, dancing trees, cans of soup, combined with powerful words and colorful, dramatic images that relayed the grace of God. One of the posters that she painted said this: there are 3 things that keep life from being so daily: to make love, to make believe, and to make hope with everyday common stuff and people around us. Simple. A lot of what we need is not really overly intellectual and so far out there that we can't grab hold of. A lot of what we need for life is the basic stuff that we need to apply to our lives. How many of you are familiar with Gone with the Wind? Margaret Mitchell's book, Gone with the Wind? Okay, I got all morning here. We can stay here as long as you want. Gone with the Wind is a really interesting book. It's not really about the Civil War, although it takes place in the Civil War. It's about two women. One of them was Scarlett O'Hara, and you're familiar with her. She's the one who twirls the umbrella, and she's got this nice white skin. She's got the rosebud petal lips, and she's always flirting with all the guys. And as Ecclesiastes says, there's a woman who hides her heart in snares and nets. That would be Scarlett O'Hara. But the book really paints a picture between Scarlett O'Hara and her friend named Melanie. Now, Nick, you stand the two side by side. One is really flirtatious, and the other seems to be plain. And Scarlett seems really conniving when you place the two side by side. You see the contrast and the differences between the two. I point that out to say that's what Proverbs does. And that's where I want to spend our time this morning, in Proverbs chapter 14. Because the writer of Proverbs, that wise man Solomon, the writer of the book of Ecclesiastes, the richest man on earth and the wisest man on earth, knew something about understanding. So if you got your copy of God's Word, I want you to turn to chapter 14 of the book of Proverbs. We're going to spend all of our time in verse 1. It would be a good verse to memorize, by the way. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 1, Solomon writes, "Every wise woman builds her house, but a foolish one tears it down with her own hands." That seems simple enough, right? So you're ready to go home. And so I didn't get any takers. We're going to stay. The wise woman. Who is the wise woman? Well, you got to understand what wisdom is. What is wisdom? We think that we understand what wisdom is. For most of us, wisdom has to do with the intellect and what we learn in academia. But Solomon was not of our day and our age, and he had a different perspective on what wisdom really was. The word wisdom here can be defined as in skillful technical work, or wise in the administration of affairs, shrewd, crafty, or cunning. It was used to describe shrewd men such as astrologers and magicians, but the word can also mean things like prudent or wise of mind, like the rabbi or the teacher. For Solomon, if you read the book of Proverbs and you read the book of Ecclesiastes, you understand that for Solomon, wisdom has to do with the application of God's Word in daily life. Knowing when you should apply it and when you should not. So, when he's describing, and it's interesting that he phrases it in such a way that he says, the wise woman, and technically it can be the wise women. He's using the plural to describe all of women. He talks about women in a lot of different places. In 11:16 and verse 22, Solomon advocates graciousness as a virtue alongside wisdom. In chapter 12, verse 4, the wisdom shows up as a marriage relationship because it allows the husband to brag in his home. In chapter 3, verse 33, it points out that wisdom prospers in the home because it follows God's guidance, and the result is blessing on the home. And then you get the epitome of what wisdom really is in chapter 31. And most of you are wondering why I didn't go to chapter 31. Because everybody uses chapter 31 to talk about mothers on Mother's Day. I thought we would approach it from a little bit different angle. Chapter 31 really talks about the character of the woman. Chapter 14 talks about how we establish the building of the home. And notice, it's interesting here, he uses home, that's translated home. Most of the time it's translated house. And a woman building, and the word build literally means to come up from the foundation. You know how we put studs and then build a roof and then we build the inside of it? He's talking about a woman who is actually building her home. He's talking about the social structure of the home. And he says that a wise woman, one who is prudent, crafty, understanding of God's ways, builds her home. She takes one brick at a time and builds the home the way it needs to be, or the way that God ordained it for it to be. In other words, the woman who builds her home, the wise woman, is the woman who thinks more about her home and her family than she does her own character, her own life, and what she's doing. Describes a lot of the women that I know growing up. Describes my grandmother, my mother, Kathy's mom, her grandmothers. I wonder, have we not gotten away from that, though? What is the focus of our lives? In Ruth chapter 4, verse 11, Ruth is praised as being like Rachel and Leah because she is interested in building her home, unlike some of the women around. Read a story recently about a woman who was cleaning house, and she was putting away her vacuum cleaner. And she had 3 toddlers at home, and she was spending her time, she felt like she was spending her time doing nothing but cleaning. And then this particular day, she was supposed to have company over for an evening meal. And she had spent the day cleaning, and then she turned around and looked at the patio doors, which were glass. And on the glass, what does she see? Smeared food. She got closer, and yes, it looked like Oreos and peanut butter. And as she got closer, it really was Oreos and peanut butter smeared on. She had cleaned all of the house and didn't see that. She sees it, and she sits down on the couch in exasperation, thinking she's never going to get done. And the phone is ringing, and she picks up the phone. This was before cell phones and caller ID. And her mother's on the other end of the phone. And she says, "Hello." And you know your mother, she can tell when you're exasperated and when you really don't want to talk. "Hello, dear. How are you?" "I'm trying to get all this housework done, and it doesn't seem like I'm making any progress whatsoever. These kids make more of a mess in 5 minutes than I can clean up in a half a day." "Oh, that reminds me," her mother says. "I need to do some house cleaning of my own. You know that mirror in our bedroom hanging on the door? It's got little fingerprints all over it. I need to clean that. Except every time I go to clean it, I think of the masterpieces that they are. And I just can't bear to rub off those fingerprints because it reminds me of my grandchildren so much. And every time I look at it, I see them and I get a smile on my face. It's priceless art. Well, I've got to go. I hope you're having a good day. Hey, hang up the phone. And that woman sits on the couch and looks at those fingerprints and that Oreo and peanut butter on the glass. And something in her mind clicks, and her whole perspective has changed about what she sees on the glass. Is it the mess? Are we building a clean home? Have we not gotten sidetracked sometimes about our priorities and what we're really doing at home? Investing in the future? These are not just children that are crying and whimpering and yelling. These are God's artworks. And He's given us charge of them. And let me remind you, it's only for a short period of time. Because they're gone before you know it. And there's a hole there. Invest in them. Invest in your children. Invest in your grandchildren. Invest in the children that live around you. Don't shut them out just because they're not yours. We're about building families and homes. That's what Solomon says that the wise woman will do. He says something else. Remember, I pointed out at the very beginning that he's holding two pictures up. And he starts out with the wise woman. She builds her house. He says the foolish one is the one who tears it down with her own hands. Now, you need to understand what really foolishness is. As I tried to explain with wisdom, there is a difference. The word foolish means dull, thick, or sluggish. Dull, thick, or sluggish. Which means that when she hears the Word of God, it doesn't sink in. It's like water on a duck's back. It just flows off. She doesn't get the meaning of it. She doesn't spend her time studying it because she's so focused on other priorities and other goals. The foolish woman is the one who doesn't realize what she's doing while she's doing it. It's the woman who berates her children for the simplest things. The woman who doesn't get it, that she literally is pulling down the walls of her house and her home by what she does, her negative attitude. Her perspective is only thinking about her goals, her ideas. Proverbs 11:11 indicates that the weak woman is the woman who is given over to talking until she tears down all the things around her. Proverbs 2:17 points out that this foolish woman forgets or maybe ignores the things of her youth, like where she grew up, and her faith, and her commitment to God. And finally, Proverbs 9:13 through 18 suggests that this woman is loud and isn't interested in anything but her own desires. She doesn't practice discernment and is willingly susceptible to the wiles of others. I'm kind of disappointed she's taken her out, because that's the focus of what Mother's Day is all about. What are we doing? Building our homes. Reminds me of the story that Stephen Glenn once told. Famous researcher was growing up in his house, and one evening at the evening meal, he spilled a glass of milk. He was young and he didn't have big enough hands, and so he couldn't grasp the glass good enough. So what do you do when one of your children spills milk? His mother did something really interesting. She said, "I have never seen milk spilled just like that. That is so wonderful. Why don't we get down and play in that milk?" And they did. And after they had finished playing, the mother said, "Now, you know what we've got here is, you know when you make a mess like that, you've got to clean it up and restore everything to proper order. So how would you like to do that? Would you like a mop or a rag or a sponge?" And he said, "I'd like a sponge." And so they worked at cleaning it up, and she said, "Okay, now, you know what we just did is a failed experiment." She said, "Because you didn't have hands big enough, you need to figure out a different way for carrying the milk. So let's go outside and let's fill something with water and figure out and see if we can figure out what's a better way to carry this so that you don't spill it." And so they went outside. She filled up something, and he figured out that if he held it closer to the top, he could carry it without spilling it. He learned that mistakes were just opportunities for learning something, which is what scientific experiments are all about anyway. Sometimes in the heat of the moment, you and I forget what really life is all about. That we're not here to keep a clean home. I always said that when our daughter was at home, a sign of a messy house was a sign that there's children there. And I love going into a messy home because children were generally there, and I like to see children. Don't we miss the boat sometimes? I realize that mothers have a lot on them. Reminds me of the mother who had 3 little boys, and you know what 3 little boys are like. They're something else. And she was out in the backyard playing with them, and they were playing cowboys and Indians. And a neighbor comes up and wants to borrow some sugar, and she sees them out back playing around, and one of the little boys points his finger at his mom and shoots, bang, and she drops. I mean, it's just beautiful acting. She drops on the ground. The neighbor's standing there watching, and the mother doesn't get up. She's thinking something is wrong, so she runs through the house and goes to the back door, bends over, and says, "Are you okay?" She said, "Shh, go away. You're bothering me. This is the only time I get to rest." I know that mothers have a tough time. And I really, having lost my mother, have a new appreciation for motherhood, and having seen several other mothers who my mother had 4 boys, and she was outnumbered with my father. That made 5 of us, and she didn't set a good example for me because she jumped in with the rest of us. She didn't teach me anything about what girls were like, and so when I got married, I was in the dark, and then I had a girl. I really got enlightened about what girls are about. My mother did it all. She went out and played football. She went out and did everything with us. Mothers have a special place. I got some questions for you. If you'll start to put the first one up. Why did God make mothers? These are answers given by elementary school age children. So, slide up to the next one. You missed the top of that. It says, she's the only one who knows where the Scotch tape is. Think about it. It was the very best way to get more people. Mostly to clean the house. Think about it. This is elementary school children now and their mindset. To help us out of there when we were first getting born. Let's go to the next one. What ingredients are mothers made of? God makes mothers out of clouds and angel hair and everything nice in the world and one dab of mean. They had to get their start from men's bones. Then they mostly used string, I think. Okay, next one. What did mom need to know about dad before she married him? His last name. She had to get to know his background, like is he a crook? Does he get drunk on beer? Does he make at least $800 a year? Does he say no to drugs and yes to chores? Remember, this is elementary school kids and their perspective on life. Next one. What would it take to make your mom perfect? Anybody want to take a guess? Okay, next one. If you could change one thing about your mom, what would it be? Yeah, I like the last one. I'd make my mom smarter. Then she'd know my sister did it and not me. Not me. Me is supposed to be at the end there. I guess what I really want to say, I ended it on a somewhat comical note, but to point out that kids have a different perspective than we do. And that we need to build in them. We don't need to change them, make them into our ideas. We need to build what God has already instilled in them and give them the best of who we are. And the interesting thing is I can give you a lot of different ideas, but they're my ideas. They're not yours. God gives you the common sense and the wisdom that you need as you read His Word, how to apply it to your life. And what you need to do for your children because they're different from my children. And God is really neat about how He works all this out because He wants to work in your life different than the way He works in my life. And while I give you all kinds of information, what really matters is how God is working in your life to build your home. I want to do something different. And I didn't ask anybody for permission because it's always easier to ask for forgiveness than it is to get permission ahead of time. I don't even know whether this is possible or not. But I want you, if your mother is here, I want you to go to her during the invitation time and tell her thank you. If there is a lady here that is special to you, that has meant something to you, you need to let her know that. If there's a grandmother here that has touched you in some way, you need to do that. You need to let her know this morning. While today is the most, people use the phones most today to call their mothers, and that's great. There is nothing like putting your hands around the neck of that woman that meant so much to you. So, as you come and play. We're not going to sing. She's just going to play. And I want you to take this invitation to respond to those women that have meant something to you. Yes, go ahead and do it now. Don't wait for her to start playing. This is the invitation, and you're responding to God. You're not responding to me. How has He touched you with those women that are special to you?